Hello and welcome to the Actual Tech Media Expert Series. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event on best practices to protect against zero-day threats. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. So not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that come in. Some of you have been saying hello over in that questions panel. We love to see that you're here and where you're logging in from. So keep that up. The Q&A panel is also the place to just to let us know if you're having any technical issues. A browser refresh is going to fix most issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, at the end of the webinar, we're going to be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, these Expert Series events are special product-neutral looks at pressing technology problems presented by an expert in the field. But the support of our sponsors makes it possible for us to bring you this content, so we want to give a special shout-out to those sponsors. Over the next few slides, I'm going to share some messages from our sponsors today, and they'll refer to links that you can find in the handout section of your console at any time during the presentation. As always, the handout section also has a few valuable Actual Tech Media links. There's a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics. There's also a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events like this one. All right, so now before we get into the main presentation, a few words from our sponsors. We are supported by Rubrik. Rubrik is a cybersecurity company, and their mission is to secure the world's data. They pioneered zero-trust data security to help organizations achieve business resilience against cyber attacks, malicious insiders, and operational disruptions. Rubrik Security Cloud, powered by machine learning, delivers data protection and cyber resilience in a single platform across enterprise, cloud, and SaaS applications. Their platform automates policy management of data and enforcement of data security through the entire data lifecycle. They help organizations uphold data integrity, deliver data availability, continuously monitor data risks and threats, and restore businesses with their data when infrastructure is attacked. You can learn more at Rubrik.com, which you can click here or at the link in your handouts. Today's event is also sponsored by Census. Census is the leading internet intelligence platform for threat hunting and exposure management. Census knows that for many cybersecurity professionals, a cyber attack is not some imaginary scenario. To that end, you can snap the QR code or click the link on your screen for a rich page of resources. On that page, you can learn more about an emerging cybersecurity solution category, attack surface management. ASM can help you detect, defend, and stop threats before they occur. That same link is also available throughout today's event in the Handouts tab. So once again, take advantage of that handout section where you can find all the links that you've just seen. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic session. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today. If you've been with us for a while, you've seen him before, Evgeniy Kharam. Evgeniy is a longtime security industry insider. He spent 15 years in security roles at the Herjavec Group, winding up as a vice president for cybersecurity solution architecture. And of his many current projects, one of them is as the co-founder of the Security Architecture podcast with Dmitry Raidman, where they conduct in-depth discussions with senior security executives about emerging security issues and sectors. It's a great podcast, and you'll see links for it later today. But that makes Evgeniy a perfect person to cover our topic today, which is best practices to protect against zero-day threats. So I'm going to turn things over to Evgeniy.
Hello, everyone. So happy to be here today and talk about this very, very important part, zero-day threats, how we can protect from them, what they are, what we can do, how we can understand them better, and kind of go much deeper into the space. We're just coming out of Halloween, So this term is definitely very, very spooky because people are afraid from 0 days. And it's definitely a very interesting Halloween theme, if we can say this. Before we begin, I want to just show quickly the agenda. We're going to talk today about several different things. We will talk about the problem. We'll talk about what's vulnerability, virtual patchings, a bit of S-bombs because they are very important, detection, and definitely protection against this particular part. I'm Evgeniy. I have Dimitri here on the slide as well. He helped me to organize some of the slides, and he's one of the leaders in S-bombs. And we also have together a podcast called Security Architecture Podcast, where we review different vendors. But today we're going to focus on threats, 0 days, and what to do. So let's think about this. We have devices. We have a lot of devices. And these devices run software. And there's a lot of software in the world. Like basically, if you think about this, anywhere you look, you're going to have software. It could be your phones, it could be cars, it could be screens, definitely, cameras, and many of them. And it's mind-blowing because the software is written by people, and these people make mistakes. I think last time I checked, there's around 27 million different developers. I don't even know how many software exists. It's probably hard to calculate because even if I wrote a script for a couple of lines, it could be a software, or I wrote something humongous for millions of codes, could be a software as well. There's this interesting database called National Vulnerability Database. It's not the only one, but it's definitely one of the biggest one. And this database capturing known vulnerabilities, we also call them CVEs. Known vulnerability is basically something that somebody told about this or it was discovered. And in many cases, majority of them, there's also some kind of a fix for it as well. We'll talk about it a bit later as well. If you're not familiar with the vulnerability, it's basically a bug in a system that was not done on purpose. And it was discovered by the bad people, by the good people, or by somebody in general. Definitely important. To tell you more about how many, in this particular database, there is more of 230,000 different CVEs that they have there. It's quite a big number. Now, does this mean all of them 0 days? We'll explain more about this a bit later, but there's quite a phenomenal number, and there's other ones that exist as well. So now let's think about this. We have software on one side, we have known CVEs on the other side, but then we have an unknown vulnerabilities that are still not covered, not exposed, or basically not known to us. But they remain known to some other people. This could be the bad guys. This could be certain companies that found a vulnerability in somebody else but didn't disclose it yet. So it's create a problem because basically if there is a software that has a vulnerability, but we don't know that it exists, then it creates a 0 day. Basically, it creates an option for the bad guys or for certain individuals to use this particular vulnerability for their own interest in one way or another. You see here 2016. I'll explain why it's matter and why it's important very soon. But this is basically a 0 day. Now, 0 day vulnerability is related to something in the code of the company. This could be your switch, this could be your router, this could be your Adobe Photoshop, this could be many different things. And we found many examples in this case as well. We can create on top of the vulnerabilities an attack vector, or we can create a malware based on this as well. It's going to exploit this particular vulnerability, this particular bug in the systems. And there is definitely many examples of how it's done and what's happening with this. But it's important to explain that there is a time frame for the 0 day, and I'm getting there very, very, very soon. I do want to provide one example before we move on. So this is a vulnerability called Dirty Cow, so 0 day Dirty Cow, that was found in Linux in 2016. But it's existed in Linux from 2007. And it's quite relatively easy to actually exploit. So think about this. Right now, 2023, in 2016, was many years that basically were there that the vulnerability was not known. Do we know if the bad guys didn't know about the vulnerability? It wasn't known for us. We didn't discover it exists, but the bad guys may use this for all this time and nobody knew about this. So it's quite significant range of time. And from time to time, we find these new vulnerabilities and news, basically the 0 days later on that people are using. So this is probably a very, very good time to talk about the 0 day attack life cycle. So let's think about this. Vulnerability introduced. What does it mean introduced? I wrote some kind of a software as a developer. I'm not a developer, just giving an example. And I made a mistake. Or I didn't know that it will cause XYZ. Time passed, in case of the Linux, quite a lot of time, and somebody discovered this vulnerability. We hope they discovered and disclosed this vulnerability to the appropriate company. The appropriate company is going to be the companies that actually manufacturing this particular software. Okay. Now, the company need to release a fix, but in this time frame, we basically until the fix is not there, and we are discovering this time. This is basically the window for the bad guys to act on this in case they didn't know about it as well. They may use the 0 day attack even before it was discovered or disclosed because they didn't know about it. But now vendor need to release a patch. And what's happening in many cases when the vulnerability got discovered and disclosed, we don't go publicly and tell everyone about this because we want the vendor to also create a fix. Because if the other bad people didn't know about it, but it knows they exist, they may take advantage and use this. When the vendor tell about the problem and release a fix, it's a time to patch and basically fix the problem. In some cases, we already know about the vulnerability and the problem, but we still don't have a fix. We will talk about the virtual patching very soon. So think about this part. We talk about this. There is a vendor that that knew about the problem. They need to deliver the fix to you, but you need to also understand: are you actually affected by this problem or not? So this is a very, very important problem. So you may read about a vulnerability on a 0 day on the internet, but you will not know if you have this problem. The vendor may let you know later on that, oh, if you're using version XYZ, then you have this problem. But there are things to do, and unfortunately, Log4j was a bad example of people didn't know who and where they use it. So I mentioned virtual patching just right now. There's going to be a window of time in some cases where there is a vulnerability, there is no patch yet, but we don't know the technique to get in. So I can do a virtual patching because I don't have a way to patch it yet from the vendor. What this could virtual patching be? I may put the device of this particular system in isolation completely, or I may put the system behind an IPS, next generation firewall intrusion prevention system, or different way to protect it, because it's going to be quicker and easier for me to find a way to prevent the bad guys to connect. We'll spend much more time talking about other preventive measurements as well. I do want to show some big examples about some other 0 days. There's quite a lot of them, but this is the one of some of them that really, really known. And I think definitely the people that you work with them and understood how big is this problem. WannaCry was quite big enough. Microsoft Exchange was big enough, and Log4j was probably one of the biggest one on the impact on the industry to understand how big is this problem and how important it to understand where everything's located in your environment in the application. So let's switch a bit and talk about the detection. So we already kind of defined what is the 0 day, what is the vulnerability, why it's important, how it's working, and what to do with it. Now we need to understand how we detect if there's a problem in my environment. And we'll pick on Log4j. So what happened with Log4j? It was announced, and people, okay, I have a problem, but how do I know I'm infected again? How do I know I have this issue? So I need asset management. I need to understand in this particular case, we're talking about asset management in the application level, not just your devices, but it's also related to devices as well, because we knew what is the Linux, that it's Linux, we knew where it's running. So we need to understand how many Linux devices I have. We need to understand what is the libraries potentially running on these devices, or the versions running on these devices. It's all related. But I also wanted to understand where is the Log4j library is running as well. And this is the good time to talk about transparency in your software. So think about ingredients in a salad. Same, very similar to transparency in your software. If I know ingredients in my salad, and I'm kind of doing a reference right now, and I know there is an issue with tomato and avocado, and I know all the dishes I'm serving, and for every dish I'm serving, I know the ingredients, then I will quickly be able to find which of my dishes has issues. This is an example of software bill of material, but in our case, we want to talk about applications. So we want to understand the ingredients of the software, which library exists. And if we have a way to kind of understand and categorize them, we will be able to very quickly understand our impact. So SBOM library, think about a big library. When we have many books, in our case, we're going to have many different applications, and not just applications, versions of applications as well. And in case an issue happened, unfortunately, there are probably going to be more problems in the future, I can understand very quickly which of my books, which of my applications are impacted in this case. So if I want to have a mean time to detection and resolution, I need to monitor my software. I need to understand the ingredients. And this way, I will be able to understand I have a problem very quickly. So let's say if I'm at home and I know somebody telling me there is an issue with particular Windows, if I know how many Windows I have, if I know which manufacturers I have, then I will understand there's a problem with this particular Windows. But in our case, applications, and unfortunately, while at home, like I may have 5, 10, 12, maybe 20 Windows. In companies, I may have thousands of applications, and this way, I may have thousands of this software bill of materials. Then don't forget the versions part as well. Interestingly enough, in US right now, and many other companies as well as going there, the companies will need to provide this information to the government. Certain vendors already including software bill of materials as part of what they do when they work with customers as well. So this is where we're going with this. And it will definitely help us to understand, find the problems quicker. Let's go back to 0 days. So as I mentioned before, 0 day, in a way, it's a bug. Now, we're not creating a 0 day because it was introduced by a developer in the software, but we can exploit the 0 day, and we can create the exploit that's going to exploit the 0 days. Now, this malware, this basically exploits, could be cheap or could be very expensive, depend on how easy to introduce them or use them, and many other factors. If you ever play video games or you've read about video games, you're familiar with the idea of like common, unknown, rare, and like legendary. Think about this: the more unique your exploit, the more expensive it will be. Why it's important? Because it's important for prevention. And this is the time to talk about prevention and explain why it's important. If we switch to prevention, we will need to understand that the bigger or the more unique is the exploit, the less people will just throw it away. They basically will need to have a decision on how much time I will spend on a particular customer to hug them and how much money it will cost me. Because the moment it will be known, the moment people will understand it's happening, they may start investigate and they will basically found there's going to be a problem. The problem going to go to disclosure. Disclosure will go to the vendor. The vendor will release a patch. This zero-day exploit will be gone. So this is very, very important. There is opportunity cost for the bad guys, and they're very careful on how to use it. This is why we want to make it hard for the bad guys. We really want to make them work and potentially leave us alone and go somewhere else. So what do you want to do? We're going to go back to defense in depth. We're going to create multiple layers. We're going to create a very good architecture. We're going to have connected infrastructure, and I'll provide examples on some things we can do and some other ideas that are known but not always used. So one important part, if the bad guys were able to get to your environment, we want to move very quickly to prevent lateral movement. We don't want them to go anywhere. And if they cannot go anywhere, they may leave us alone and not going to use anything else. Lateral movement related to zero trust. Zero trust is a very important concept and architecture. I'm a big believer. I'm an architect by trade. It's not a product. It's a way to design your architecture in the company, and you can use different products to achieve this. Here's an example. When we started using firewalls around 20 years ago, we created rules by subnet and IP addresses and destinations. With zero trust concept, we now created by user, so I need to know who is Evgeniy, or applications. The destination will be very specific, not any, and I can even put application name. So I'm closing the pipe from the very big one to very, very, very small pipe. And this is where we're going. It's used a lot in ZTNA right now, Zero Trust Network Access. We'll talk about this later as well, and many other things. And we're going to dive in and go some examples. So next generation firewall got introduced around 15 years ago. We not only let everyone go out anywhere they want, we're going to let it know which applications they're using. So we're talking now about layer 7 rule-based and not layer 4 versus subnets and IPs. We're talking about application and people. We can go inside the environment and talk about west to east, how basically we're segmenting the environment, lateral movement, and who can connect to what between different subnets, not just to the internet. We can go even deeper and talk about micro-segmentation when we control which server talk to which server in the same subnet, where in the same subnet, everybody allowed to talk to everyone. So we can really take the resolution really down and create very, very dedicated rules. So even if the bad guys were able to get to our environment, they will not able to go anywhere from there. I mentioned ZTNA. It's part of SSE, Secure Service Edge. If you guys are familiar with me, I love this topic. I talk about this quite a lot. I think it's very important to protect and control people, doesn't matter where they are, and not just in the office. So with SSE, Security Web Gateway, and ZTNA, we can create rules on how you connect back to your environment with only particular applications, or how do you go to the internet with only particular applications? And we can layer it on top of it, understanding who is Evgeniy, from which device you're coming, and many other things. So ZTNA and Secure Web Gateway are definitely technologies that are part of the zero trust journey and supporting this entire architecture. We can also use fancier more tools like remote browser isolation, enterprise browsers that now creating a separation between us and the bad guys. We're not going to go deep and talk about this because I can probably talk for a very, very long time about these topics as well. I have a separate presentation just about remote browser isolation, enterprise browser. But to quickly explain, think about this. If you need to go and clean your house, you're going to put gloves that you know you potentially going to touch okay surfaces, or you're going to touch dangerous surfaces, but you don't going to care because you have a gloves that protect you. Same is here. We're creating an isolation environment, not a proxy, that separate us between the bad guys, and the bad guys cannot get into our environment. I mentioned many different techniques, and I kind of wanted to put all of them on one timeline. So this is different techniques, and I need to move myself a bit to the right here that we're using here to create a better control on the network stack. I didn't talk about endpoint, but endpoint is definitely, I think it's like a table stakes. You have to have an endpoint. You have to have EDR, EPP. We'll talk soon about some other ideas here, but endpoint is definitely important. All these techniques, all these controls are as part of your stack. And I really hope that your stack has not just these controls, but also they are talking to each other as well. I'm sorry if you hear the noise outside. There's an ambulance passing. I'm trying to kind of decrease my microphone sensitivity right now. Great. I didn't mention identity, but this is the time to talk about identity because the zero trust concept is built on identity. We say a lot, identity is the new perimeter, but not just this. There's a lot of work need to be done with identity on how we onboard users, how users move inside our environment. I mean, like if you join the company as a support person, but later on you move to be an admin or to somebody else, your credential may change, or you may be completely moving from technical to marketing. This onboarding, offboarding, and moving inside the company is very important, and in many cases broken. We need to understand what's the better way to provision to people. We definitely need to have a multi-factor authentication and single sign-on. And there's many other things like control of privileged users. And I mentioned a bit before, when we do authentication, we can create kind of a hierarchy to do conditional access or just-in-time access to control this part as well. Just-in-time access is very interesting part. Think about not giving admin access to your users at all, but when they need admin access, you're going to ask and request it. You're probably familiar with the idea in Windows that you run as a user, but when you need to do something important or installing a new application, you do right-click and say run as admin. So this is the same scenario, same idea. This way, you are simplifying the amount of people that need to have admin access, or kind of not simplifying, shrinking this part as well. And also, when you're asking for the just-in-time access, you probably will need to provide some kind of a ticket to justify this. This could be also part of PAM, the password access management part, and WALs. That's definitely important. Cloud. Cloud is another important part. Some of the techniques we spoke about are cloud related, but there is many other products in the cloud that help you to understand what do you have there, the permission in the cloud, and what you can do in the cloud as well. Each of these slides is probably a separate presentation and how is it all connected. And you may be very confused, like, oh, do I need to buy all this? Like, do I need to really have all this information? In some cases, you don't need to buy third-party vendors, but you definitely can use what's come with the cloud provider, or basically native tools as well. And don't forget, when you use all these tools, you also want to have backups. You want to understand that the environment is backed up as well. And we're almost done. I know I spoke for quite a while, and I can probably speak for quite a long time as well. But I want to introduce last security controls. It's very interesting. So deception technology is usually part of endpoint, but can also be as a honey tag on a network. That it's not an active prevention technique, but it's a very active deception technique. And it should be quiet and not used until somebody trigger it. What I mean by this, if I create or put a file on your environment, or I create a user on your environment that I know in the beginning that it shouldn't be used, and there's actually no usage for this user, then what you can do is to create rules if somebody used this username and password, or if somebody used this file or copied this file from my environment and I put a beacon inside this file, then basically everything starts screaming, and you know that you basically have a bad guy inside, because only the bad guys gonna be using and trying to use such deceptions. So this technique been around for some time, probably more than 10 years, but I don't see many companies widely use it from different reasons. I'm not sure why, but I think there's a lot of use cases here that can be used. I mentioned just right now that if somebody used a deception, canary in some cases, this will screen. It will screen where? To your SIEM, XDR, and to your monitoring system. So probably not something new to you. You want to aggregate your alerts from all the tools you're using. This could be including the tools that are you using for your application security to one system that will help you to organize all the information. And in some cases will help you to search for the information as well, because all the modern and new SIEMs now have APIs and have the ability to go and do SOAR, security orchestration and automation response capabilities there as well, to potentially use it for the searching and monitoring. I mentioned about monitor for applications before, but it can be aggregated in some cases. In some cases, no, because you may only run in the application environment and you want it to be segregated between different people. Thank you very much. This topic is very, very interesting topic. And again, every slide here can be a different presentation by itself, but probably a good time to ask questions and go deeper on some of the cases. We have some time. So back to you guys. Let me know what are the questions from the audience, and I'll be very, very happy to answer them. Oh,
All right. Well,
uh,
thanks for
man,
the refresh. Glad to have you on.
awesome.
Yeah. So, what I was saying before was, great presentation, and I did want to ask you just, about your perspective on the industry's progress against 0 days, just because you've been in the industry for a while. Do you feel like, progress is being made in limiting the damage with various defensive techniques, or 0 days still every bit as damaging for as long as they're unknown?
I think the 0 days is still everybody top of the mind. People think about them. I don't think they think about them every day because there's nothing they can do if they don't know
Mm,
they exist.
yeah.
But uh, from what we saw for the last couple of years, there's clear indications that you cannot just wait and sit. You cannot just think and scared and be scared. You have to actually do something about it. From the technique we described in the presentation about basically be prepared on what you can do.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you talked about a lot of different techniques there in your presentation. It was a great overview. What's your sense of the percentage of organizations out there that have security defenses and policies in place that are sort of maximally protective against 0 days? In other words, how many organizations are taking advantage of all the ways that they can manage the 0 day risk?
Unfortunately, we have a big problem with budgets at every time and prioritization.
Yeah.
So if I can guess, you're probably around 40 to 60%.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Um, okay. Yeah. So some of the questions here coming in from the audience. One of them, in your opinion, what can be done at the policy level to better manage the risks associated with 0 days?
Well, listen, it's an interesting question because we usually talk about tools and what we can do, what we can buy, but we not always talk about the procedures and policies we have in a company. And I think it's important because we need to train people and people need to be ready to know what need to be done. So when we say policies, this could be user guidance, user acceptance policy, what you can or cannot do. What so for example, literally last week, Okta had announced another breach. And if you guys read what was there, is they claim that the person used his personal email with Okta computer. So the question rests here, is Okta policy allow people to use personal emails or not? Because if it's not allowed, is they allowed to use personal emails, then there is no problem that he used it. But if you don't have a policy that describes what you can or cannot use, then it's become a problem. So this is why we need to pay attention to explain to people what they cannot use. Can they plug devices to the laptop? So we can block USBs, for example, but we can also have a policy that says you're not allowed to block USBs. And in some cases, we don't have enough budget to able to control everything. So we have to at least say in a policy what are our intent and what we can or cannot do. Even so, in some cases, it's very, very hard to block certain things or control certain things. So policy takes a lot in the company security program. And I think and believe truly that when you looking and redefine your security policy and security program, you need to look and understand your policies. I'm a big believer to don't make them, like a lawyer agreement, because some policies look like you're signing your life away. It
Yeah.
should be friendly for people to understand what you can or cannot do because they need to sign on them.
Right. Right. Yeah. The trade off between a good policy and one that's actually going to be followed and understood. Yeah. Um, hey, there's a question here from Victor who's wondering if any 0 days have been found for OpenAI. So I haven't
Oh,
seen anything
okay.
about anything, but
Yeah,
have
thank
you?
you. Victor, if we had one, we probably will know about it right away because it's a very popular topic. They just announced 2 days ago the new GPTs, and today the entire LinkedIn and Facebook is full of them already. So I
Right.
personally don't know about them, and I hope it doesn't exist. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, question from Tina. This is an interesting sort of gray area between 0 days and known but unpatched vulnerabilities. The question: what's the best advice if the third party does not patch and the application is necessary for the business?
In- in- So we have external vendors is not patched, but we need it for the business. So in this case, there's a couple of things. The business needs to have a justification why they need to use this application. They need to have a risk profile created for this particular vendor to understand what kind of data going to be in this vendor and what kind of data going to share with this vendor as well. And somebody potentially need to sign a risk. So basically, you're coming to the idea that somebody in company says that I'm okay with the risk because what the business value here is much more. And the other part, maybe there is other creative ways like virtual patching to patch the application virtually or protect the application to still have it even so there's no patch.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Like in a lot of cases, I used to follow Microsoft security pretty closely as a journalist, and what would happen sometimes is if a security researcher released details on a vulnerability that Microsoft had not yet patched, they would often publish, you know, a mitigation document about like other steps that you can take to kind of block it off. But until they could get a patch ready. And it just seems like if there's a third party vendor that's, man, if they know about a vulnerability and they're not going to patch it, you've really got to look for a new vendor because it's just not a sustainable. um,
Yes.
sustainable relationship.
And we
Yeah,
do expect from SaaS vendors to constantly improve and do work as well, if it's SaaS vendor.
yeah, yeah. Um, Here's another question on the industry side. What are some of the techniques that the vendors use to decrease the number of 0 days?
This is a very interesting shift we have. We all familiar with the idea of pen testing, and company will do pen testing once a quarter, once a 6 months, once a year. But pen testing quite expensive, and in many cases, they only tackle a particular part of a company. Even so, if you do like an annual one, a big one, you cover a lot. And as you just mentioned, if you're a SaaS company, you're probably releasing a lot of patching and a lot of changes and versions all the time. So we have a new way that I think it's quite a very good direction of companies where we're doing bug hunting. Basically, they allow people legally to find problems and vulnerabilities in their company. And if you find them, you basically get a price. So HackerOne is one of the companies, there's many other one as well, not promoting any of them. But there is definitely several companies that allow constantly for the good guys to find problems in your code, get paid for it. So you as a company will potentially will have findings in your code by the good guys and not by the bad guys.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also on that question, there's been just the trend in the industry, for developers to shift left, as far as the security, with DevSecOps and trying to make the code more secure to start with, like at the beginning, rather than addressing security at the end, and hopefully that's having some effect on the number of 0 days out there, or the rate of zero
There is
days.
definitely a big shift of people to have produce more secure code, 100%, and I'm
Yeah.
sure it's decreasing the number of vulnerabilities externally the 0 days.
Yeah. Um, its next question, so you mentioned earlier, some of the, like, all of the security, tooling options, but you also mentioned, people have limited budgets, and somebody's asking here, it's hard to buy all the tech. Where do I start? If somebody is concerned about 0 days, in just having at least, part of their budget addressing that, what gives them sort of the most bang for their buck to get started?
From my perspective, a couple of things. One is just spoke about create the correct policies for your company, understand them. Two, do almost like internal gap analysis. Understand your asset management, understand where everything is located, understand, and it's like a general practice as well, not just for 0 days, but it's going to definitely help there as well. Understand where's your crown jewels, like what are the bad guys want and what is important to your company to run the business day by day. And after you did that, understand if you have systems that are not patchable anymore, like Windows 7, for example, or something older, to understand how you can segment them, or what we spoke before, virtually patch them. This is where I begin. So you can use all the technology you have right now, not buying anything, but have a very good inventory, understanding the flow of traffic. And then based on this, the next step is understand the capabilities of the technology you have right now, and can you use it to achieve some of the things we spoke before, like segmentation, like zero trust framework and architecture, understanding your IAM, understanding your onboarding and how you provide people access to applications. So this is where you can start without buying a lot of stuff and just doing services internally.
Okay, excellent. Um, another Chat GPT related sort of question. Carolyn is asking, with the emergence of large language models, what kind of risks and security measures do you see? I don't know if that's dead on for 0 days, but maybe there is a 0 day angle. But just generally, what kind of risks and security measures are you seeing with the
I
emergence of large
think the
language models?
biggest The biggest part, like, if we go back to medieval times, as we say, we build a catapult, they build a bridge, we build this, they build that. So it's like
Yeah.
basically like a race going on all the time. So with
Uh-huh.
the LLMs we have right now, is the bad guys can be quicker as well. They can analyze code quicker, they can potentially create their toolkits quicker. So the biggest problem going to be right now is that they can automate and become quicker to analyze what have to create tools that we will need to protect against these tools.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Another question here. What advice would you give to new cybersecurity professionals on staying ahead of zero-day threats?
It will be really depend in where she or he is focusing. Are they more engineering? Are they more architecture or design? What I will recommend in general is to understand new framework, understand NIST, understand zero trust. So align with where the industry is going. And for some, by framework, I'm not talking about just, oh, I want to be this compliant, like ISO, for example, because ISO, it's a very compliancy framework that looks at procedures, but there's also frameworks that are related to architecture and design and controls, NIST, CIS, to see what is the recommendation and the best practices there, and it will move you to be protected from zero trust, my God, 0 days as well. And also look on MITRE. MITRE is very interesting. MITRE attack framework and MITRE defense framework is also very interesting for this perspective as well. Defense is relatively new, so it's also a good tool and resource to analyze what's happening and where the industry is going.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that's a great set of advice there, and it's also probably a good place to leave the discussion. Evgeny, thanks as always for putting together a really thought provoking session. You've given us all a lot to think about in terms of how to protect against 0 days, and appreciate all your insights here in the Q&A. Thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right, and finally, it's time for the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card is Donald Lutz from Colorado. So congratulations to Donald Lutz. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank our sponsors for making this event possible, Rubrik and Census. Once again, I want to thank Evgeniy Kharam for joining us and giving a great presentation. And a quick shout out to his podcast at securityarchitecture.com. And thanks to all of you for attending and for all the great questions that really brought this Q&A session to life. We really appreciate it. That's what drives our sessions is what you're interested in and getting answers for you guys. So that concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.